Hello, welcome, or welcome back to something slightly different. A quick heads up from the InsTech team, our CEO Matthew Grant recently joined Bootstrap Confidential as a guest, sitting on the other side of the microphone for a change. In the episode, Matthew talks candidly with host Charles Green about what it really takes to bootstrap a business, from the moment he decided to go all in, to building InsTech without external funding, navigating cash flow scares, hiring and losing great people, and ultimately exiting successfully. It's an honest conversation about discipline over hype, why profitability mattered more than rapid growth, and what Matthew would do differently if he were starting again today. There's also plenty of practical insight for anyone building a business, particularly if you're doing it the hard way, without investors. If you've ever wondered how InsTech was built behind the scenes, or you're thinking about bootstrapping your own company, this one's well worth a listen.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this episode I'm delighted to welcome Matthew Grant, one of the founders of InsTech, who bootstrapped it 8 years ago towards a very successful exit recently. Welcome to the show, Matthew, and thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks, Charles. It's great to be here. I always enjoy being on the other side of the microphone as well, so thank you for giving me a chance to be a guest.
Yes, I feel very much sort of, pupil with master. You've got over 400 podcasts under your belt. I was adding mine all up. I haven't even made three figures yet. So I hope I do an okay job. But thanks very much for joining us. And like always on the show, I always want to start with, obviously you had quite a significant academic and corporate career prior to 2016. So what was the catalyst that made you go, what's this side hustle, this is interesting. I'm going to go full in and just do this 100% of the time. What made you take the jump?
Well, like a lot of people, I had a very enjoyable and successful career, but ultimately I had a CEO who I disagreed with, and only one person was going to win that argument. So I was out there in the world on my own, did some consulting work, enjoyed that, and then came across Robin Mertens, who's my partner now, and I'd always had a sort of inkling that I wanted to build a business, and it looked like a good business to get involved with, and that was kind of the motivation to start it off.
And what is InsTech? I know it provides thought leadership in technology for insurance companies, but can you give us a bit more color about what it is that you did?
Yeah, so our clients are basically in insurance. We work for insurance companies, and we also have the people selling technology into insurance. And back in 2016, when this sort of idea emerged, was really just in the back of fintech, when insurtech started to get defined sort of early startups. We've evolved since then, so we're now working with scale-ups because they tend to have more money to spend. But essentially the idea is the same, which is insurance companies are looking to understand what's happening thematically. It's the AI just now people are interested in, it's climate, things like that. They want to know, what's happening in the themes, who should they work with? And of course, on the other side, you've got the people building technology who are looking for clients, want to get some visibility, and we've been able to balance both. So we get paid by the technology companies to help them find clients, and we get paid by the insurance companies to advise them on what's happening in the insurance space.
I'll come back to monetization because you've got quite an interesting model in a minute. But I just want to touch on your background because I know you've got a really, really strong background in risk and analytics. And when people talk about people founding startups and doing startups, everyone always thinks, wow, that's so risky, that's so crazy. And I take the slightly counterintuitive view that actually people who start businesses are not super risky and massive risk appetites. They've actually just simply better at analyzing complex risk and managing the stress that complex risk and multiple outcomes can produce. So how did your background in risk help you, do you think, or did it help you? And if so, how, when you were sort of analyzing the opportunity and trying to get everything built and get going?
Wow. Well, I suppose it does help being fired from your job because then you've got to go and find a living. Whereas if you're actually, if you've got a steady job and say, I'm going to chuck it in, then it's really difficult to do that. So I think I was in the situation where I was doing consulting work and I recognized that actually it was more fun to be working with people and more stable to be having a company rather than just do consulting work. I'd say that, but probably for anybody, I think the key question you asked in there is about what defines success. And for me, I wanted to be able to continue to draw a salary from the company we started just from the very first day. So I was fortunate enough to be able to, from leaving my previous employment to doing consulting work to moving into InsTech, to pretty much maintain the income I brought in, certainly from a salary basis. And that was always a criteria about, if I could do that, then your family life could continue. There was less stress about, am I going to run out of money? You've got to find the clients, of course. But if your focus is like, primarily, I've got to build a business that can pay my wages, then that de-risks it. De-risk a lot of it for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting strategic choice because you know there are two schools of thought. Do you build a business and the primary goal is to get your income back so that you can pay for the things that you're used to paying for with your lifestyle and family, or is your primary goal to drive growth and therefore as soon as every penny's coming in, you're employing more people, you're trying to launch more products, you're scaling. I mean, myself and my business partner were like, we're not doing anything until we've got at least the majority of our salaries back and can afford to kind of have an existence. But how did you kind of balance that? Was it just like we're not going to do anything until we've got full salaries, or was there a moment when you went, okay, we're close and we're going to start incrementally now expanding and looking at new products?
Yeah, it definitely comes to a point at which you sort of try to figure out how you scale. I think that people probably look at a lot of success stories and sort of survivorship bias of companies or founders that have taken their money and been in their 20s and then made millions by selling the company. But I think the reality is really, if you're building a business and you're focused on needing to generate revenue and income, you could be profitable to pay yourself, then that in itself implies or applies a discipline to how you run the business, and you make decisions about profitability. And it doesn't have to come with no growth. It might be slower growth, but I just think it's a good thing for everyone to do, to be able to do that. And then you get to the point where you say, well, actually, we could do more of this business. And also, if we're going to sell it, you can't just be a business that's got two founders in it, because that's kind of hard to sell.
Yeah.
So therefore, how do you scale that business to other people? And then you sort of get to your point, how do you invest? And what investment means there, for our business anyway, primarily was salary. I mean, we didn't, and these days, the benefit is, particularly a business like we have, there's very little sort of physical assets you need to buy. You can rent pretty much everything. And so your money is going into people. So the question is then, okay, am I going to spend money on other people's wages rather than pay myself? And particularly in the short term, you're always going to be able to do things better than many people. So you've got to allow for that sort of that growth. But yeah, we could talk more about that and the kind of choices we made.
And then obviously you decided to bootstrap. I'm a passionate fan of bootstrapping and all its benefits. But what were the reasons that you thought, let's just get this up and running, let's bootstrap it, let's get product market fit, let's work out how to monetize it? Did you accidentally fall into bootstrapping it, or was it a deliberate decision? And what was the sort of thinking?
A couple of things. I think this stage in life, latter years, rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, you tend to think you know what you're doing, and having somebody who's an investor and then tells you what to do is just, don't always like that. And there's a cost to the business in terms of time. And we weren't in a hurry. And in a way, I'm not quite sure how to spend the money other than just hiring more people. And then, we wouldn't have tested the market. So for us, it was, if we discovered something that we felt, right, we need to accelerate this with bringing some money in, and we need to go and hire some more people, or we need to run some bigger events, because that's predominantly where we generate our revenue today, then we would have done that. But we never got to a point where we said, well, we could accelerate this business if we went out and hired a lot more people. We did have one product we started testing out that could have gone that way, but in the end, it just didn't. We couldn't get the product to generate the revenue, so we tested it. A sort of great fan of Eric Ries's lean startup. We tested the product and people weren't going to pay for it, so there was no point investing money in it. If there was no market for it.
Yeah, also a fan of Eric Ries and the lean startup. So just talking about testing the product and generating the revenue and monetizing it, how did you initially go about testing the product, getting product market fit, and then you have quite an unusual monetization model?
Yeah, so initially, the primary driver of revenue for us, and still today actually, was what we call membership. So we basically build a community of 30,000 people around the world, some face-to-face, some digital. And of those, we have at any one time about 100 companies that we'll call members. And essentially, they pay us a fee, annual fee. They can draw down on that to get certain benefits, such as trading in for sponsorship or the podcast. And then we have sponsorship. And so for us, it is very much, we've got an idea for doing an event. Will anybody pay us to do it? If they will, that's product market fit, because someone's paid us £20,000 for an event, because these are evening events. If somebody pays us money for a membership, which started off at £1,000 a year and is now in excess of 15, then you're kind of learning as you go. If someone does that, then you know it's good. If they won't, then it's not.
Normally when you have two founders, then you're going to have a huge amount of skills and experience with those two founders, but you're also going to have gaps. So when you had those gaps, what were some of the, I mean, did you teach yourself? Did you employ other people? Did you just go, you know what, we're going to focus very specifically on this thing here? What were some of the gaps that you had, and how did you resolve those issues?
No, it's a great question. I sort of relate this to the reason I occasionally try and do some plumbing or electricity DIY is to remind myself why I pay the professionals to do it. And I, in a sort of gentler way and probably equally sort of dangerous way in work, you can sort of do that. And so for example, on bookkeeping, found a brilliant person called Jo through People Per Hour actually, and she has grown with us. She runs a bookkeeping company. We use Xero. She is just absolutely fantastic and really good value, and bills us monthly, and we can completely rely on her numbers, and that's worked really well. That's one way we do it. We're now using HubSpot for our sales and marketing. Before we had HubSpot's quite expensive, so before we had Pipedrive, which is quite cheap. Before that, we had a spreadsheet. So sort of my background was sales and marketing, so I knew how to build a sales tracking system, but rather than spending any money up front, we basically said, right, let's just do it on Excel, and then we moved it to Google Sheets so we could share it, and then at some point we need a better system. And so we were sort of iterating as we went. We then also hired, as we grew, because we had 4 years of really good growth, we then hired a fractional CFO for a year, and we hired a fractional human resources person. So the CFO is once a month. I think the HR person was probably half a day a month.
And I've got to ask, how did that go? Because fractional CFOs and fractional HRs and fractional people to kind of boost your skill set are very much a la mode at the moment, and lots of startups are doing them. I have my own reservations. How did it go for you?
It's kind of leading the audience, I think, there, Charles. So it was mixed, frankly. And if Stuart's listening, I'm sure he'd sort of acknowledge this. We had 1 day a month, which is hard for somebody to really immerse themselves in the business. And a business like ours, there's a whole range of things we need to help with, from reporting to Companies House, from tracking all the sales, from systems. And it was very helpful having an independent view come in and talk to us about this. It was also, we sort of recognize what and where you need to pay for something versus where you can do it yourself, to your point, or you need someone like that. So I think we had that for about 1.5 years, and it came to a natural end at that point, and we didn't have anybody after that. Fractional HR, that was slightly different. So that, to my point earlier, we didn't talk about it earlier, but I'm a great believer that you sort of build the business you want to become without getting bogged down in operations and overhead. So we were always thinking, what would it be like when we'd be a bigger business? So when we're up to about 17 people, we started getting HR in to build out company handbook and policies and what you do for paternity leave. And actually that gave us a really good, robust set of policies that we could then draw on. But once we'd done those, we didn't need somebody HR anymore. And actually somebody internally stepped up and is now excellent at doing that and has picked up a lot of that kind of role. So I think you've got those choices. And then we also had a COO come in, because any company has got two founders doing a lot of the jobs, looking to scale operations. And that was, again, really good for a period of time, but did a very thorough job within that year. I think had we continued to grow, then we would have needed somebody, but we can talk about that separately.
And as you're growing up to 17 plus people, and you're bringing people in, and I always ask founders of startups this: what sort of, are there any particular traits you're looking for adaptability, for a laser focus on specific skill sets, for jack of all trades as opposed to masters of one? What were the type of people you were looking for, and then how did you think about remunerating them? Because startups, particularly when you're bootstrapping, you're kind of employing with one hand tied behind your back, because pretty much everyone else can offer better money for less hours than you, with probably less stress.
Yeah.
So what sort of people were you looking for first, and then how did you think about trying to motivate them either via remuneration or other means?
Yeah, my great sniff test for somebody when I'm interviewing them is like, wow, why would you want to work with us when you could go, to your point, you could go and work at all these other places? And our first two graduates, one of them was from Oxford University, both had a first, I think, one from Exeter, both really bright people, hired them in COVID. I mean, they're very characteristic of what's worked well for us at that level, sort of at early levels. So they were very curious. They wanted to take the risk of working with a company like ours. They liked what they saw. They recognized they could have gone somewhere else, could have worked McKinsey's, could have worked for a big law firm, would have got paid a lot more money, but they would have been worked really hard, and they wouldn't have got anything like the exposure and responsibility we did. And consistently, the people we brought in at that kind of level have really, but they're doing things. They amaze themselves and what they're doing. One of the people we brought in, and she'd be the first to admit, is really shy when she came in, and within 2 years she was on stage interviewing people, she was doing what you're doing now in the podcast. She was hosting webinars, completely transformed. Had a really good boss that coached her on that. And it's just so satisfying seeing people like that. And those are people who realize in that stage of their career, it's not just about the money, it's about the experience you get. So that kind of work, that's worked very well for us. And then we've also brought people in later in their career, which is a whole different dynamic. And we can talk a bit about that as well. But certainly those early career ones, we feel very pleased with the people that have joined us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a good lesson for any founder, because you don't have as much money, but if you can offer really fast-paced career growth, and so many founders do this. I've got people in their mid-20s who are doing things they would never be doing for another 10 or 15 years in a big corporate environment. Then that, to the right mindset, to the curious mindset, which is probably the number one word that every founder hits on when you ask who do you employ. They say people who are curious, and for us that was like the number one criteria. That's very powerful in itself. But one of the things that because there are so many stories out there put out by the VC community and the investment community, lots of founders think, okay, well, get them on. I can't pay them as much. I'll try and give them some career growth. I'll offer them some options on the hope that at some point there's an exit in the future. I mean, how valuable do you think those kind of things are, or is it just a whole heap of admin that ultimately is not going to? You've got better things to do with your time when you're trying to grow quickly.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say if you're bringing people in early in their career and you can't pay them enough, then you're going to fail at some point. I mean, graduates, the pace of graduate salaries for sort of average jobs has not gone up that much. I mean, it hasn't gone up as fast as cost of living. If you're trying to compete with the big firms, then you're no way you're going to do it. So I think I'd say you've got to pay competitively when you bring people in at that level. Where it gets challenging, and this is what's happened for us, is all this great stuff, train them up, they get visibility, and then some other organization comes along and in some cases literally double their salary, and there's no way you can compete with that. So whatever you do, you can't compete with that. And if they're ambitious and good for them in a certain sense. So at some point you just got to accept you're going to lose people and build that into the process. So that point about what you pay people when they're coming in sort of a bit later in their career, so after 5-10 years, then it's really hard to sort of pay them competitively compared to what they're going to get elsewhere. And generally, you kind of want people there who are willing to work in an early stage company and take some risks with you. So one way of doing that is looking at options, and the EMI option scheme the government has is in theory is a really good scheme because it pays, essentially it uses the entrepreneur's relief, or there's a different name for it, but essentially they're only taxed at 10% on the sale of the company, but they're really quite complicated to run. And this is a good example, back to one of your earlier questions about where do you go for your advice, and so we did have an option scheme for our senior employees. We used a platform, a well-known platform, to set that up, and the people on that platform were quite helpful setting it up. But actually, when it came to the sale, for various reasons, it didn't really deliver what we'd expected. And so, in fact, we actually couldn't use that scheme and had to go back to something different to sort of replace the actual option scheme. So I think people need to be very careful when they look at those. This is not unusual. When we talk to the lawyers about it, they said it's quite common that these things just don't work in practice.
Yeah, and we had exactly the same issue. We didn't use a platform. We used a very reputable global law firm, and when we came to exit, it wasn't quite fit for purpose, and we had to revert to a different mechanism. And I always just think it's interesting, whether it's at the start of their careers or they're 10 or 15 years into their career, the motivation, how you motivate people that you're bringing into the organization. Because obviously, even when you do have options that work, that assumes there's going to be an exit. It's going to be a successful exit. There's going to be a big valuation. There's a huge amount of assumptions in there. And if people are just coming in for the options because they've read somewhere that, oh, so and so joined this company and they were one of the first through the door and now they're a multimillionaire and retired, is that necessarily the motivation you're looking for when you're bringing people in? It's better to have people who are proud of the work and fascinated by the product and curious. I always think, which kind of leads me on to, I want to come back to exit in a minute, but onto culture. So did you deliberately set up the culture, or did it just grow organically? And what was the culture you were trying to create that would allow juniors and people sort of mid-career to flourish and grow and sort of help you build the business?
I'd say every startup, the culture is going to come from the founder, or interestingly, the founders. So, good reminder if you're starting a business with somebody. And I think I couldn't have done a business on my own. I think having a co-founder is incredibly helpful. But ultimately, the business is going to be influenced by the culture of the founders, or the dominant founders, I guess, if you've got more than two, or maybe you have a dominant founder if you've got two. So our culture was around. You talk about curiosity. Actually, we have that in our kind of tagline. We are the community of the curious. So we like people that think about things. We don't take ourselves too seriously on the one hand, but actually we're also willing to call out things we don't understand or don't agree with. So even if it comes on stage, we'll try and do it respectfully. Or on the podcast, if someone says something we don't understand, or we think they're sort of being a bit too marketing-y, we'll just say, look, maybe you could explain that because I don't quite understand. And that also, that's part of why people work with us, because they know they're going to get the honesty, and that works with the team and amongst each other. We respect the individual's view. When Sam, who heads our marketing, came in, he had a really strong marketing background in a startup and building events. And we were at that stage, I think we're still using the 30,000 people community. And he said, well, actually, why do you say 30,000? Because I think at that point we had 15,000 names on our marketing database. And he goes, that's all you can really call your community. And I sort of argued with him for a bit. And I realized actually that was right. We had to accept his viewpoint on that.
You said it was much more important to have in your view, to have a co-founder, which I would, as someone who had a co-founder, would agree with. And I'm going to kind of second guess your answer here. Is that because when you're going through the journey, and a lot of the journey is kind of like, walking through the fiery paths of hell, sometimes it can feel like, but when you're going through the journey, it's so much easier if you've got someone you can talk to who knows exactly what's going on. I mean, partners, wives, family, friends, etc. They can kind of understand, but they never really quite get the kind of the minutiae of the situation you're in. So is that the reason? And does that help you cope with the stress and the toll that running a business takes, or there are other reasons as well?
Yeah, definitely having someone you can bounce ideas off is really important. I mean, what I've learned is just because I think something's right, it doesn't mean it's right. Especially later in your career, you've been successful in another job, and sometimes you need someone to say to you, actually, I don't agree, and I think the important thing of it in a partnership is you have to allow for the fact that you have to allow the other person to have their point of view if you don't agree with it, and just choose your battles carefully. But also, I think we all think differently, and I tend to sort of think by talking to somebody. So I might have an idea, but it's not necessarily a fully formed idea. So I go, hey Charles, I think we should do this. I've had this idea, overnight. What do you think? And you go, well, don't think we should do that. We don't think we should do that. I go, yeah, you're right, actually. It wasn't a very good idea. Or you can amplify and say, yeah, that's great. Or we could add this. And I think also it's really lonely being there on your own, running a business.
Yeah.
And of course, our staff today are wonderful, but sometimes you just got to grumble about things, and having somebody that you can sort of grumble with, get it off your own shoulders. Because you mentioned the family, and I've got a very understanding wife who's also has got a really good insight into business and will give comment. But I come back too often and grumble about things, which inevitably there's always something in a day to complain about. Then her point of view is I'm always grumbling about the business, whereas Robin and I can just sort of
Yeah.
get through things and move on. So there's lots and lots of reasons. I just think it'd be so, well, I was going to say so hard to, if I was to do it again, if I was to start up another business, I could probably do it on my own, but I'd have some other kind of advisors. So I might have, yeah, I don't know, advisors or something else. I think the other thing on when you've got investors, you have those advisors, investors, but it's a very it's a very uneven distribution of power. You know, your investors are telling you what to do, and if you slip up, then you're out. So they can be very helpful when things are going well or things are kind of neutral, but there's a limit to how much you can really expose to them and sort of. Whereas a founder, you're absolutely in it to get your interests are completely aligned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So obviously, you've very recently exited. So, and this is always an interesting thing because when people start businesses, you know, it's like, oh my God, can I get this thing up and running? And anything that's not focused on that as a distraction, then once it's up and running, it's like, how can we grow it? How can we build it? And then you sort of get to the point of exit, at which point you realize, I wish I'd done all these things right back at the start because that would have put us in a so much more advantageous position now, or it'd be easier, or we get a better valuation. So, what were some of the things that you'd fortuitously had done that were good, and what were some of the things other than obviously the confusion over the options? What were some of the things where you think, well, maybe if we just spent a little bit more time at the start on that, that would have made this whole process a lot easier?
Well, let's start with things we did well, and maybe I'll give you a few things didn't do so well, and we'll come back to end it with some happy stories as well. So, we understood the importance of marketing for our clients because our business, we're marketing ourselves, but we're also marketing our clients. So we invested disproportionately in the website, in the things we're doing with everything we do. We make, it's back to my earlier point, we try and make ourselves look like a bigger organization, and that's given us a sort of lot of visibility and credibility, and it's actually how our acquiring company found us. So that worked well, and I wouldn't really change much about that. The feedback we got when they were going through due diligence was that the way we'd been tracking our financial records was really good. So they're very quickly able to identify where we were, what the plan, and we were on plan, and we started the process. We had a forecast for the year, and just sort of being British and a little bit modest, we slightly underestimated the growth, having also been caught out a few times. We sort of underestimated the growth and the profitability. So as we moved through this due diligence process, our numbers are looking better and better. So from their point of view, there's a very sort of positive trend. It changed the dynamics of the business, and it made the business worth more. And they were happy with that because actually it was a better business. So I think just being a little, people always, not always, but you sort of traditionally people look at the kind of hockey stick, and you go out to the founders and you have this ridiculous plans that no one knows is ever going to work, but it's meant to show you're really confident. And then of course you fail. You fail straight away, and then you're immediately on the back foot with your investors. Far better off to have your first year as an investor where you're actually over delivering. So those are a few of the things that worked. I think just what I would say was a reminder for anybody in a business these days is, yes, there are still companies, and certainly ones that make the headlines, are being sold on multiples of revenue or numbers that don't seem to have any kind of basis in reality. But a lot of companies, and particularly those that are PE backed, which our acquirers were, are looking for earnings, looking for EBITDA. I mean, and so we went into this. When we started thinking about the sale process a few years ago, we'd seen evidence of people that bought communities, and we thought our buyer might be a big organization like a Google that wanted our community because then they could access all the sort of partners and we'd be bought on a multiple of revenue. Well, the reality is that actually these days that doesn't happen very often, and really, so therefore, if you're going to go, EBITDA is going to be an important part of it. You really manage your costs in the couple of years coming up to the acquisition.
Yeah, I think it's very rare, I think, apart from in the media, that anyone gets bought on multiples of revenue these days, outside like the latest new tech thing. It's almost always multiples of EBITDA. But you mentioned when you were replying there, you said something. You mentioned that a few times in the past you'd got your numbers wrong. So obviously you come from a sales and marketing background. So how did you what was the lesson and how did you learn it and get better at it? Because that's so often an issue for any business. Like, well, these are our numbers, that's our plan, and like, oh, we've been a little bit over optimistic there, or there's been a disconnect between forecasting and marketing, or what were the lessons you learned and when it went wrong?
Yeah, what do they say on those sort of financial adverts? The past is not necessarily a representation of the future. You may lose your investment.
Yeah.
I mean, that happened sort of the first 3 or 4 years. We were doubling revenue each year, but we started off from a very low base. So that wasn't, it was still a good, but it was. But then what happens in 2023? There was a kind of mini financial crisis, and people stopped spending money on marketing. And we'd forecast. We hadn't forecast doubling. We'd forecast a growth of about 25% going into the year. So it was still quite conservative, but actually at that point, 25% on the revenue you had was quite a lot. So we were hiring into that. We saw, so this is another interesting angle. We had a lot of positive feedback on our reports. Turns out, though, that we couldn't generate a lot of revenue from those. And so what happened, we had a forecast. There was kind of top-down forecast based on feedback that people liked these reports, is one good example. When it actually came to then go and make the sales, then the sales started to slow down, and we were able to. We had Joe I mentioned before did a very good sort of management account. She was doing all the things you expect, P&L and cash flow, but because we weren't being more conservative about readjusting the forecast during the year, we were sort of managing on the cash in the business. We did realize in time, but we sort of had to adjust pretty quickly. We realized, right, we're going to be running out of money in 3 months' time, or not make payroll in 3 months' time. And that is a scary place to be, because you can talk more about it, but if you sort of realize that if you've got a business, unless you want to do something really nasty and just blow the whole thing up and declare bankruptcy, you can't walk away from it. I mean, that is the only way to walk away from it, which is horrible for lots of reasons. So you then have to say, okay, we're going to keep this business going. We have to do a sort of managed reduction in force, and so we had to let a few people go, but we did it in a way that was sort of respectful. Hopefully they'd feel that, and we managed through it, and we learned our lessons from it. But we did get quite close to the point where you're looking at like next month, this could be really quite uncomfortable for us, and ultimately discomfort was telling people we had to let them go, which is never nice, but the business continued.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think every founder who's managed to get to exit has been very, very close to the wire a number of times. And I know, talking to our mutual friend Rupert Lee Brown about this, he says here, whatever happens, you have to survive, because the second you stop to exist, you're gone, and it will never come back. So you just have to find some way to survive the cash flow crisis, whether it's massively cutting down on costs, unfortunately trimming staff, but survival is key. And then once you survive, you can start to kind of build back up again and see yourself through the gap.
Yeah, Charles, I mean, I just to prove I did listen to that podcast. That was a really memorable moment, because his point was not just you have to survive as the founder, the business has to survive. So
yeah,
if you don't manage that, then everyone loses their job. So for the sort of, and that's just the reality of how the whole world works, really. But I think it's understanding that sometimes you have to tighten the belt and keep going, and that is the only way you can come back through and you can hire again. But it's not just you as an individual that's going to survive. It's the whole. I mean, don't forget, everybody when you did your business, people were hiring people and we're giving people jobs in the economy. We're paying taxes back into the country. There's a massive good we do, as well as just the pleasure we get from doing it ourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you could go back 8-10 years now, I mean, as you said at the start, like you'd had a successful career, you thought you were pretty confident, you knew lots of things, and then obviously, like a lot of people, you start running a business and you discover all these things that you didn't know, or you mistakenly thought. So if you could go back now and give yourself one piece of advice that you would say to any founder who's just started their journey, or they're about to make the leap, what would be the one thing you would say, do this one thing well, is, whether it's pride in your work, focus on your metrics, managing your cash flow, rolling with the punches. What would be the one piece of advice you would give to any founder now, that they should, if they focus on this one thing, it might not do everything, but it will enormously help you kind of get through?
Can I have two? One's
sure,
but it's quite important. So one is try and take 2 weeks holiday. So I sort of realized I haven't taken 2 weeks holiday in a row for 10 years, and and there's really no reason why I couldn't have taken 2 weeks holiday, and I did manage to take a week's holiday and just turn off. But there's a sort of serious note to that, which is you have to be able to step away from the business, and you've all got obligations to our family, and there is life outside of work. So I think there's a sort of broader theme, which is there is life outside of work. I think in terms of the one other key difference, it sounds a little bit cruel, but I'd say if people aren't working out, it's fair on everybody to let them go earlier. And it's just ultimately everyone's got strengths, everyone's got things they're good at. It might just not be the right fit for the company. And I think understanding that early and moving on again just stops a lot of distraction. And I think there's a related version in terms of product as well. Sometimes you can try and do things with product because you think, this is my third one in a way. There are quite a few things I thought, these are really good, that people must want to pay for this. This is brilliant, and there's no one wants to pay for it. And you just have to accept that actually you can have the best idea, and people might value it in the sense, in the same way we can go onto Facebook and pay nothing for it, but they're not going to pay you any money for it. So you've just got to stop doing it or find a way to do it that's much cheaper.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest lessons when you think what you've built or the feature you've added is absolutely fantastic, and people tell you it's enormously valuable, but then when push comes to shove, no one's actually going to put their money, their hand into their wallet and pay you for it, and that's always quite a crushing moment. But yeah, it's an important one to sort of accept it and move on, rather than doubling down or tripling down, thinking, I just need to keep going. I need to keep going.
Yeah, and then the flip side to it, of course, is when things do work, just double down on them. We're now primarily an events business, and we're doing bigger and bigger events, and the acquisitions helped give us the sort of visibility, the scale. So we still do like 2 or 3 hour evening events with 300 people, but we're now doing 2-day events. And I think we could have done that earlier, but we sort of we're a bit snobbish about it. We thought, look, we've got knowledge in this industry. We enjoy writing reports. We enjoy telling people what's going on. Let's build a business that we generate reports and insights. And in reality, what people wanted to do is they wanted to come to our events and meet people at our events and see people on stage and put their product on stage, and that's what they pay us for. So I think we did wind that down reasonably quickly, and it was quite helpful for us. But ultimately, I think we don't all have the luxury of running the businesses we want to run. We have to run the businesses that people want to spend money with us on.
Matthew, that's a fantastic way to finish the podcast, because that's a brilliant piece of advice. There's always that kind of like dichotomy between what you think is amazing and great and what the market wants, and it's basically trying to bridge that and do something that's kind of like both fun and enjoyable and you're proud of, but at the same time people will pay money for. So thank you very much for your time and for joining us, and look forward to talking again soon. Thanks,
Giles, and thanks for persevering in my end of my cold as well. But I really enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for the chance to be on the podcast.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration.